Today we are discussing about heart disease. So normally start the discussion with a case. I open it up. I take comments from my co-host, and then we open the discussion with and the other audience as well. Anup, I'll uh, you will take your comments. We'll take other comments as well. So this is about 50 male who had an interval MI who was thrombolized outside. Post thrombolysis, he had where he was resuscitated, and later he had TTCA via radial route. And after this um, uh, torment, after some turbulent course, he slowly recovered and he got discharged on day 4. The mild LV dysfunction, no other issues. Background, he had hypertension, hypothyroidism, and some urticaria. Some senior executive in a telecom company. He's on regular 1 week post discharge. He was discharged with medications, and second 4 weeks of discharge he comes back, and he's apprehensive, doesn't want, hasn't joined his, and on follow-up he seems to be doing okay. The shows an ejection fraction of 50%, and it's include aspirin, ticagrelor, rosuvastatin, ramipril, dapagliflozin, vitamins, pantoprazole, thyroxine, some SOS use of cetirizine. The basic lab workup. The main question that he asked after the consultation is that he wants to go after 2 weeks for a family get together, which for quite some time, more than 3 months. So his question to you or question was whether he is okay to travel or not, and in case if he has to travel, what would be the what should he do in case he is traveling? What are the precautions that he needs to do, and how he should travel? So Anup, over to you about this case. To his thoughts, how would you advise this? Anup, are you there? Maybe Anup, he was actually in Gurgaon trying to proctor the tower. We will take comments from others. I can see. Srinivas sir, I think you heard the clinical case that I mentioned. Post-interval MI, who is otherwise doing okay, wants to go to Ooty for a together, and he's asking for your permission. What would you suggest? Can he travel or not? And if in case he wants to travel, what should he do? Sir, if you can unmute yourself and
Right. I mean, if he doesn't have LV dysfunctions and if he didn't have any arrhythmias and if his functional evaluation, like even if he didn't achieve 85% THR, even if you achieve 70% THR, say around 2 weeks post MI without LV dysfunction, without arrhythmias, then I think still when there's no ischemia which is induced or any arrhythmias which are induced on TMT at 70% THR, I think we are okay with sending him for a trip. Otherwise, if he has LV dysfunction or if he develops symptoms at 70% THR, then or arrhythmias, then that means he has underlying significant coronary disease for which we better do an early angiogram and then think about a revascularization rather than allowing him to go. I mean, that would be my decision.
yeah.
Was I
So
audible?
yes, yes, sir. You were.
Yeah.
We could hear you. So if I understand correctly, you would ask the patient to undergo a treadmill test, and based on the test capacity, you would make a decision fitness to travel. Is that right,
Yes,
sir?
yes. Even though he doesn't have a LV dysfunction, I would be still comfortable in doing a limited treadmill test, at least achieve a 70% THR before allowing him to board a flight, because on flight he might have some issues, and it's not worth taking a risk by allowing him to go on a flight. So some functional evaluation before he boards a flight. Yeah.
On a similar note, sir, in because you mentioned on travel by flight as well. Do you think these treadmill would essentially on the mode of transport, the place of visit per se? If the person prefers road or by train, do you think still decision would be still be considered, sir?
On road, I think even if he has some symptom, there is a way for him to stop and go to the nearby hospital. So still, it is fair enough. If he wants to go get an evaluation done elsewhere, that is okay. But going by flight, I would be a little more cautious as to allowing him to board a flight. Whereas if he's going by, say, a bus or his own vehicle, a car, he can stop wherever he wants on the way, go to the nearest hospital if at all he has any symptom. But yes, if he has any arrhythmias or if he has LV dysfunction, I would advise him an angiogram uh, pre-discharge. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, sir. We'll get back to you and I Raghu sir, can I take your comment? This case, how would this case?
Yeah, I just want a few clarifications,
Yes, sir.
Praneeth. You said this chap had an anterior MI. I
Yes, sir.
take it that he did not undergo a primary PCI.
It was a rescue PCI, sir.
He had a rescue PCI.
Yes, sir.
After how many hours?
After 12 hours, sir.
After 12
Approx,
hours. And
yes,
was it a proximal or a mid LAD lesion?
proximal
I'll come to the
LAD, sir.
relevance of it.
Yes, sir.
Was it a proximal or a mid LAD?
Proximal, sir. Proximal LAD.
Proximal. Okay. So basically, this chap underwent a revascularization pretty late, 12 hours later, after an initial thrombolysis. And I fancy that his rescue PTCA would have been done because his STEMI flow may not have been grade more than 1 or 2. Am I right?
It was thrombolysis. He had VT, and then he was having angina for which he underwent rescue PCA, sir.
Okay, fine. So, first of all, I find it difficult to believe that within 2 weeks of the ICTUS-C with a proximal LAD lesion and 12 hours delay in revascularization that he has a normal LV function, but that is besides the point. I will just take the generalities of the question, can a person travel? Can a person travel by air or not? Now, these two questions, I think to some extent, Srinivas very rightly pointed out that we need to know something about the functional capacity of the patient. And whether, because he had a VT, we do not know whether it was an ischemic VT or it was a reperfusion arrhythmia. So we have to be reasonably sure that he did have some form of arrhythmia which could be dangerous. So in such a situation, my main concern is that if you remember those days in the past, you would not have experienced those days. We used to confine patients to 6 to 8 weeks of rest. It was those were the days in the early 80s and late 80s when revascularization was not a done thing. And despite streptokinase, we had quite a few good majority of patients who had not reperfused. So the entire idea in those days was to reduce physical activity, so that the two important things that happens post MI are the thinning of the scar and also the incidence of arrhythmias. So if a person has a recent MI and there is reason to believe that he is having a sufficient scar burden, then we should go back to those days when we were a little more guarded in permitting a person to exercise. I still belong to that school of thought, because if you permit a person to exercise early in his post-MI period, if then the chances of arrhythmias and worsening of LV dysfunction because of the increased load on the heart can happen. So I would be a little guarded in permitting him to travel. When I do recommend travel when it's absolutely necessary for such patients, I do tell them that by the second week they should be fit to travel. And air travel is particularly not very frightening in these cases because of the pressurized aircraft, and it really the question of high altitude really does not come in such situations. More of the high altitude problem is more in cases who tend in mountain climbers and all that, and patients who have severe pulmonary hypertension. Mild moderate LV dysfunction is not a contraindication for air travel, and patients can safely do so. The only things that I sort of emphasize to the patients is that there should not be stress of travel, in the sense that they should not be reaching the airport at the last moment, stressing themselves to get to the gate, stressing themselves to the security and at the boarding gate. So that is more important, because when a person tries to hurry, he stresses his cardiac status more. So mental and physical stress, if you remove from the travel, which is inevitably always present, if a person can travel early to the airport, take things cool, then there's no reason why they should not travel. As an additional measure, if the patient is symptomatic, I generally advocate that they are taken in a wheelchair to the aisle and deposited in their chair. So these things are adequate precautions. I do not think that air travel by itself in the current days of pressurized aircraft imposes any increase in the oxygen demand or places an oxygen burden on the patient. So these are some of the things that I think of, and I would like to take your views and other people's views on that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Complete the discussion which you brought, because the difference between proximal and mid LAD, anything in particular that you were trying to look into, or just trying to?
Yeah, in the sense that I can accept
the
a good
relevance
LV
of
function in a mid LAD lesion, but a proximal LAD lesion who has undergone a rescue PTCA, the scar burden or the ischemic burden is so profound that they rarely have normal LV function. That's what I was trying to draw your attention to. So since if a person has had a very good rescue and has no involvement of the LV at all, to have a normal LV function in the presence of an extensive anterior MI, then that patient should be quite comfortable in traveling, with a few of the caveats that I mentioned. That was my only argument. We often see patients with moderate to severe LV dysfunction immediately after an MI, after a PTCA. But over a period of 1 to 2 weeks, the LV function inevitably improves if the PTCA has been done early in the presentation. But a late PTCA, it takes more than a few months for the stunned myocardium to recover. And sometimes I've seen on a follow-up echocardiography, it takes 2 to 3 months for the person to normalize his LV function or even come to a fair LV function level.
Thank you, sir. On forward, any particular thing on the place where they are travel, particularly those place or hill stations, which like stations being the high altitude
problems come in only when you travel more than 11,000 feet. Between 8 and 11,000 feet, there is some rarefaction in the atmosphere, but the person who has a normal LV function can still climb comfortably. It's in patients with severe pulmonary hypertension that the problems of having high altitude problems by the time they reach to 7 to 8,000 becomes very important. But in the routine cases of LV dysfunction, provided they do not have pulmonary hypertension because of their liver dysfunction, they are quite safe. They can even trek the mountain, especially if they have a good effort tolerance. And it's more than 2 weeks since they've had their revascularization.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. So, whenever the high
Just one more
altitude,
point I would like to add, Praneeth. Just
yes,
one more
yes, sir.
point.
Yes,
In US, for example, they have all these simulators which answers many of these questions, particularly if patients want to go on mountain hikes and all that. If they're trekking up a mountain, sometimes they are advised, if the facility is available within their state, they are advised to undergo these simulator tests, which tend to simulate the conditions which are found in various levels of altitude. And they are more objective in answering these questions. But I just use a thumb of the rule, Mel, because I have gone through these things because my brother-in-law was having severe LV dysfunction, severe PH, not severe LV dysfunction, severe PH for many years, post MI, post CABG, post revascularization. He continued to have severe LV diastolic dysfunction, and yet he used to travel almost everywhere. He traveled the entire globe despite all these limitations, and even climbed the Machu Picchu, which is one of the highest mountains in Brazil. And he happened to take the simulator test in California once, and they cleared him to climb go up the Machu Picchu peak. So in the absence of such simulators in our country, I think we use our experience and gauge the patient's symptoms. Ultimately, it's not the EF, but the patient's symptoms. And like Srinivas very rightly said, the effort tolerance. A patient can achieve 7 minutes of exercise on a treadmill. I'm sure he can climb to the heaven also.
right, right. Thank you, sir. Those thoughts. High altitude and heart disease, which I kind of get reminded is my post, where in Usmania, while I was doing cardiology, we get referrals from the most of the patients traveling to the religious pilgrimage, that Amarnath, Kedarnath Yatra, where Department of Cardiology were supposed to give for these people who were planning, and only after we are given fitness eligible to book their tickets to that yatra. Being in the government medical college, we used to CG echo, and we used to order a treadmill test, and if we used to clear these patients in addition to detailed history about their cardiac illness, factors, and LV function. So that is what we used to do. Because you mentioned about the treadmill being to stress this patient exercise and looking about their target heart rate achievement and their functional capacity. Do you think treadmill enough should be sufficient? And in case if are there, should we go a step forward? Doing any cardiopulmonary exercise testing will add any value, or should the treadmill be alone sufficient? Any that, sir, or anyone else would like? What do you think, sir? Raghu, sir, we can take your comment.
Cardiopulmonary exercise is a more refined form of functional testing. Beyond that, see, obviously, even a patient who cannot be relied on expressing his symptoms and all that, cardiopulmonary exercise test takes you to a higher level of surety that the patient can achieve a particular threshold of work. So yes, it certainly will add to the thing, but it's a far more sophisticated and far more expensive to answer the routine questions of whether a person can fly in an aircraft or not.
Okay. Thank you. I will come to Shankar, sir, our senior physician and participant in our huddle. We get good information. Sir Shankar sir, what are your thoughts on this patient and in general when patients ask about high altitude travel with their heart disease, other conditions, how would you evaluate them and what will be for these patients? Sir, any thoughts or any?
Good evening to all, especially my friend Dr. Raghu. He has explained in a detailed manner. See, some of my patients before traveling to high altitudes like Manas Sarovar, like they seek my opinion also. So before air travel also, you see few of my patients, they seek my opinion whether to travel or not, whether to go to that high altitudes or not. So, but in this case, I strictly warn them not to go anywhere before the 3 months post PTCA. So there are some guidelines are there where we should warn them not to go. Patients with severe hypertension, arrhythmias, ischemic heart disease, valvular heart disease, congenital heart disease, pulmonary, especially pulmonary hypertension, because high altitude pulmonary edema is quite common. And especially as a family physician, general physician, I warn them regarding the VT, the venous thromboembolism, because we quite commonly come across such situations, DVT or pulmonary embolism. So,
Shankar, sorry to interrupt you. Can you increase your volume or your audio? I'm unable to hear you fully.
Oh. Sorry. Now is it audible now? Hello?
Slightly better, Shankar. Please go ahead.
So, as a general physician, a few of my patients, they before they seek advice from cardiologists, they come and ask me whether to travel or not, air travel or high altitude travel to like Manas Sarovar, Badrinath, and so. I warn them if they have got severe hypertension, ischemic heart disease, congenital heart disease, valvular heart disease, pulmonary, especially pulmonary hypertension. If they have got, because high altitude pulmonary edema is quite common. We lost one of our relatives also in Manas Sarovar. So they couldn't revive him. So we come across many situations where we should before their high altitude travel, we should investigate thoroughly regarding these conditions, and we will advise them, and if possible we ask them to seek cardiologist's opinion. In this, regarding this case, as far as my knowledge goes, I never allow him for 3 months at least post MI PTCA, because guidelines are there, and though Dr. Raghu has mentioned many things, but as far as my knowledge goes, I don't allow him for at least 3 months after post PTCA.
Thank you, sir. And do you also recommend any routine treadmill giving them fitness for their travel, sir?
Yes, we not only treadmill, we do 2G echo, simple ECG, blood pressure monitoring. All these things we do before they are allowed to travel. we do necessary investigations, especially as Dr. Raghu mentioned, treadmill test is a must.
Thank you, sir. We have Prithvi, cardiology colleague. I think just left probably. Okay, so we'll come back. Suraj sir, Suraj sir, can you share your on how would you recommend or what would this patient and any particular things take on this patient, sir? High altitude travel for a patient who has a heart disease.
Thank you, Pranit. And mainly I attend these sessions to learn more rather than talk. But anyway, that you ask me, I'll mention. See, no decision can ever be made on any patient on an isolated issue of, say, a myocardial infarction, which already happened. And some of the concerns I share with Raghu when somebody says they had an anterior myocardial infarction and delayed, say, reperfusion procedure done, and though lytic therapy was done, I would look at the electrocardiogram before I consider the echocardiographic report of normal LV function. Somebody who wants to do an exercise test on somebody like this with an ST elevations, usually after an extensive interval MI, ST elevations continue, and stress testing, treadmill exercise testing and electrocardiogram are unreliable after an anterior myocardial infarction usually. And leaving that apart, I'll not go by any single factor except all the risk factors this person has, how many of them are taken care of, because an acute coronary event is unpredictable, and the only thing that helps at least partly in predicting a future event is to looking at the whole person, the person's whole risk factors, diabetes, smoking, and blood pressure controlled, and all other risk factors is weight and whatnot. So, considering all those things, then you can make a decision. And also, when you kept a stent, and the high altitude physiology is still not fully understood. The behavior of the platelets and then other issues and blood flow to say various components of the body are still not well worked out. I agree with the physician who said, Dr. Shankar, that you will not ask him to go to high altitudes and take a chance. That's my personal advice, but it is not, say, the information that is given is, there is some discordances in the information that is given. When that is the type of information that is given, I will want to relook at everything, like including LV function. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. So, my understand high altitude and is why are we worried about one? Firstly, what is high altitude? As per definition, anything which is more than 2.5 meters is considered to be high altitude, and to have these high altitude, we know they can hypoxia, and hypoxemia can lead to kind of
Dr. Panit, sorry to interrupt
yes, sir.
you. Some of you are talking in meters, some of you are talking in feet. Talk in one language.
Okay. So high altitude again, as per the Western literature that we follow, which talks in meters, 2,500 meters is said to be altitude. And what happens in high altitude? Because partial pressure of oxygen gets reduced, the saturation gets and strain the hemodynamics, pulmonary hemodynamics, which can lead to the outcomes, which is what we are. and someone who has myocardial injury who is recovering, we don't want them to strain. Few of the literature which I could do while I was preparing, most of the literature mentioned that patients who are stable with the mild are reasonably safe enough, and I could not literature which was which suggested or which promoted doing any thing to evaluate this thing, and who seem to be stable post MI, and if they are in function class 1 and 2, they are said to be fly. Flying, they do the to higher altitudes, but the cabin pressure is something as if it's about 2000 meters, so it's almost like going at that height or pressure. So even flying should also be considered when we are traveling, because we have that hypoxia and cardiovascular hemodynamics. Regarding this patient, because he was post 6 weeks, post MI as 1 and 2, physically active, able with his hypertension, diabetes, and in heart failure, I thought he was reasonably fit enough to take the go to Ooty. I did not order treadmill test, and I cleared to travel. So this is what. So anyone who kind of disagrees or any other comments can open for a discussion. Any other thoughts? Raghu sir, what I said, or anything that you would like to do something differently? Hello, Raghu sir, are you there? Okay.
Yeah,
We
Praneeth,
have
basically,
yes, sir.
can I talk?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, basically, we now come to two aspects of this problem. One is high altitude, whether someone can travel or not, and whether someone can travel by air or not. Now, I again would like to reiterate what I said earlier, that air travel in a pressurized aircraft really does not simulate high altitude. I mean, a person, normal people or even cardiac patients do not become that hypoxic in air travel because it's a pressurized aircraft. The oxygen saturations, the oxygen partial pressure in the atmosphere are all maintained at near normal levels. So generally, I caution them not to travel if they have a stent because of all those very important reasons that Dr. Raju suggested. But sometimes they do come up with statements saying that we have come here only on a temporary visit. We need to get back. So those are the situations where I advise them that they need to be careful. There is a certain amount of risk in even in air travel, but they can undergo it provided they take the comfort of a wheelchair and they can have a supply of oxygen on demand. Now, I certainly would not advise any of these patients for any attempt at trekking or going on foot to higher altitudes, at least for 3 months, by when the myocardium should have regained its normal, the irritability factor of the myocardium comes down, and they may be able to tolerate hypoxia better. Even in such situations, as Dr. Somaraju said, it is not the EF or the ECG which are going to tell you what you need to advise. It is the symptoms of the patient. I would certainly not send a patient with class 3 symptoms anywhere. Would advise them to travel. I would not send a person who has an elevated JVP, who is in frank congestive heart failure. I would advise him against travel. But having said that, people have travel time, and again, with an elevated JVP, they have come to our institute many times. Narasimhan's patients have come to have a second opinion or to get a CRT, and they've all done it quite comfortably. So Air travel, the fear of air travel, especially in these situations, is not really that much. Certainly, I would not advise any of these patients to attempt mountain trekking or mountain climbing. Have I answered some questions?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes. I'll come. Srinivas Raju, sir. One of the discussions or the points which was brought in by Shankar, DVT and thing. How frequently do you think DVT prophylaxis, advising them coagulation or low molecular heparin for any cardiac who are to travel? Do you advise any of them, or other than the anticoagulation that we give? Any
I
patients
generally
particularly
advise them to take at least one of these low molecular weight heparins 48 hours before the slated travel and to continue it at least for 24 hours after the travel. These are especially for people who have obvious congestive heart failure, because they are the patients who, by congestive heart failure, I mean right heart failure with a raised JVP. If they are obliged to travel, then I suggest, especially longer distances, not within the country, longer distances, international air travel, I generally advise them to take prophylactic low molecular weight heparins.
Okay. Okay, sir. Srinivas, sir, how frequently do you DVT prophylaxis for the patients who are traveling, sir?
Not on a routine basis, Dr. Praneeth, unless they have some disease like sickle cell disease, or if they are pregnant, or if they have protein C or S deficiency. Routinely, they don't require DVT prophylaxis for a flight travel. And that too, you are just saying a high altitude of 2000, unless a very long distance travel, they don't really require it. Yes, if they have congestive heart failure, but again, if they have congestive heart failure, we wouldn't be suggesting them for a long journey. And one more thing, what you were saying, high altitude, the flight, that's an issue to worry. Generally, if you see the oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve, unless the FiO2 comes to around 60%, the SaO2, SpO2 doesn't drop below 90. So even in flights, the FiO2 it doesn't come below 60. So I think they do maintain good saturation, so the patient shouldn't be uncomfortable.
Right, right, sir. Johan sir, can I have your the overall case and anything that you would like to add about high altitude travel and heart disease patients? Johan sir? I think Johan probably is not there. Santosh, who joined us recently. Sir, what would be your take on? Do you have anything in addition to whatever has? What would you how do you manage this? Anything from your end?
Sir, I have a question to ask.
Yeah.
Is there any fixed guidelines to make things easier for junior consultants? Like, if LV is 30 to 35%, such a person should be avoided air travel or higher to travel for so and so months. If mild to moderate function should be allowed to climb so and so. Are there any fixed guidelines which we can practice?
So guidelines and specifically, I'm aware of it, but again, as we said, in the numbers per se, we look at functional classification more importantly than the numbers per se, because patients with very ejection fractions, their functional class will vary. So most important to look into is functional classification than the per se, and to look at their functional classification is equally to go a step and do a limited treadmill test to class better and then take a call according to that. As was said by Raghu sir, if we can go for, if you have the technology and sophistication equally as excess testing and looking at that VO2 max, make a decision. Regarding guidelines and recommendations, whether there is any specific guidelines and recommendation about these things. Raghu sir, are you aware of these any specific guidelines given? Uh,
I haven't specifically
Sir,
seen any guidelines to this effect, but
Yeah.
if you go through some of the cardiac rehabilitation papers, I'm sure you'll find some references to how much a person can do post MI or post cardio thoracic surgery. But I'm not really aware of any guidelines on this topic.
Yeah, Santosh. Anything
Nothing.
you would like
That's
to
it.
share?
That's it, sir.
Yeah, thank you. So, anyone else has any other questions or any thoughts on this ideas they would like to share?
Yeah, Dr. Praneeth, actually, the exercise which the patient can do not only depends on their functional capacity. Again, post-MI, the systolic dysfunction, the diastolic dysfunction, presence of mitral regurgitation, pulmonary artery hypertension, atrial fibrillation, whether the ventricular rate is adequately controlled or not. So it's not the same amount of exercise which can cause symptoms in a particular patient. So some patients could be having more diastolic dysfunction, some patients could be having atrial fibrillation, uncontrolled ventricular rate. So we have a different subset of patients. So we can't generalize the exact amount of exercise. So we need to correlate the ECG, echo, the LV pressures, and then we have to monitor the exercise. The first time when they come for prescription, exercise prescription has to be based on what we see at the bedside. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Patient has to completely and then to make a decision about the clearance or to their travel and given adequate precautions. So Somnath, anything finally can before we conclude or make a closing comments, final comments from your end, sir? Any final comments? We close. I don't think there are any more comments. So
Praneeth,
yes, sir. Yes, sir.
somebody was asking about guidelines and ejection fraction. Be aware, again, to remind all of us, that the diseases, and they are named, the disease entities we have, they are not a single disorders. An acute myocardial infarction is not a single disease. And ejection fraction is not a single entity. So be aware, even if they are guidelines, they don't fit into your patient. You have to make your own decisions based upon all the factors. Some of the issues Raghu pointed out. Don't ever think that guidelines will solve the problems of your individual patient based upon ejection fraction or something else or something else. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We lost you for last seconds, but I get the point. Patient has to be individually see guidelines are there to only guide us. Understanding, or I will try to sum up whatever discussed. So for given patient, firstly we need to look at indication for his travel and what is his functional before travel. And when we look at travel, we look into is who is he traveling, particularly with the flight, and what is the distance travel, and what is the place that he is traveling. And currently, because of the probable advances in technology, say the within state, within country travel, or the short distance travel, not much of a deal. We are reasonably okay. Strain on the cardiopulmonary hemodynamic, and with certain extent we can probably clear to the travel. When we talk about long distance travel, yes, some effort need in evaluation of the patient, on the functional class of the patient, any evidence of active ischemia, any evidence of heart failure, and any possible arrhythmias which are unstable or which are likely to occur. And if any of them, we tend to prolong the travel program. To get the answered better, we sometimes can depend on treadmill test, ask them to achieve for at least 70 of their target heart rate and know the functional capacity, which helps us in making a decision better. And those patients who are or class 4 congestive heart failure, it is better to in case if they do need to travel, give them extra precautions, and probably low-molecular heparin for DVT prophylaxis, and not strain or travel while sure that the travel is as stress-free and comfortable as possible, and making sure that all the necessary medications are and, taken care of, and all the drugs need to be continued even while traveling, and the travel make sure that the drugs are not missed. What I could get the discussion that we have. Anything else I'm missing, or anything that anyone would like to add, sir? We could conclude. Anyone has any other thing to add?
Sir, the patients with severe LV dysfunction who are traveling, allowed to travel to the high altitude, who are at a risk of sudden cardiac death that is higher. Such patients are to be allowed to wear life vest wearable cardioverter defibrillator, sir.
So wearable cardiovascular
Defibrillator, any role of
Indian
that in preventing ACD in such patients traveling to high altitude?
I'll try to answer. Will equally ask others to chip in. So where defibrillator only I could read, at least in I could not see or advised to wear a cardiovascular defibrillator, and those who already have ICDs, they are again now the devices are so not an issue to do all those things. I advised anyone, and I haven't seen anyone other than what I read in the literature. I would anyone who has some experience can shed light on this thing.
Pranit, I would just like to point out,
Sir.
if I may, just for a few seconds, that in today's age, I see a number of patients with ejection fractions of 35 on an ICD traveling to and fro. And now even patients with LVAD devices have started traveling. So traveling itself is not that dangerous as it was made out in the past. And especially I would like to reiterate that short distance air traveling, that is within a country, is the dangers are being overemphasized. I don't think it is that dangerous, provided some of the precautions that I mentioned are taken care of. In fact, I know at least 3 patients with LVAD who have traveled between Chennai and Hyderabad.
Praneeth,
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
in
Yes,
a lighter vein, I just want to add, traveling by air to anything you are talking about is safer than traveling on road between Hyderabad and Vijayawada.
yes, sir.
That's a very good analogy, sir. I agree with you.
Sir, and comments on wearable wearable defibrillators. In any knowledge?
Wearable defibrillator, when a person needed a wearable defibrillator, he needed an ICD anyway. If he was advised ICD and didn't have it, maybe there is a case. But don't value too much on human life, and people make their own decisions.
Yes. So Santosh, hope your question.
Yes.
Any
Yes.
any
I,
yes. Yes, sir.
I would like to add one more thing.
Yes, sir.
Nowadays, many patients are there with ICDs and pacemakers, so implantable devices are there. So when they travel by air, they should take some precautions also. At the same time, they should inform the security staff, because when they pass through the metal detector or when they are examined by the handheld wand, so there may be some deleterious effects on the devices. So they should inform the security staff before they travel by aircraft, so that they will be examined only by personal examination will be done, rather than going through the metal detector or the handheld wands or all. This is the one precaution they should take, the patients with the implantable devices.
Yes, sir. Valid point, sir. Accepted. So I think we are almost 8:30. I think so. I kind of just do a quick summary. As I said previously, short distance air travel, not much of thing. Long distance air travel and probably high altitude heights, but images which are too high. Patients who are at high risk, probably to avoid or do stress testing to assess their capacity and then take a call. Probably DVT prophylaxis, and at the end of the day, we can't be sure particularly, but these are something which do assessment and tell the patients about the risks associated, do's and don'ts, and then travel. This is what I could take from this discussion. So before I thank you everyone for your participation and sharing your weekly huddle is recorded, and recorded sessions are available in podcast and YouTube. Session is done every Wednesday, 30 to 8:30. The link that we have shared, it's the same join, and the password and everything remains the same event. So we would like your participation, and feel free if you your colleagues, and the more we share, the more we each other. So thank you everyone. Have a good night. Good evening.